Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has called ELAM the most advanced medical school in the world. And it's no wonder, considering that the institute has graduated 20,000 doctors in over 120 countries.
I want to tell you how 20,000 remarkable young people from over 100 countries ended up in Cuba and are transforming health in their communities.
6 years of medical education and room and board, and it's all free. How can one of the poorest countries in the Western Hemisphere give away something so precious to so many and expect nothing in return?
The Latin American Medical School was started in 1999 as a response to the destruction caused by Hurricane Mitch in Central America, particularly in Nicaragua and Honduras. The Cuban government, and in particular Fidel Castro, had decided to begin a medical school to be able to serve the long-term needs of those countries so that they would not have to find themselves with massive destruction in their country and not enough medical attention, not enough doctors. There were a number of countries like Honduras, Nicaragua, Guatemala, and Bolivia who were represented. The students that arrived were able to take advantage of a free scholarship to study medicine. The Cuban government didn't ask anything of them except that they go back into their communities, into communities that needed medical assistance, that needed medical doctors, and that they work to ensure the health of every single person within the communities that they came from. I came into medicine through somewhat of a different route than a lot of other students out here. My background is pretty much as an editor, film editor, and I have a lot of years experience in activism, community organizing. So I think that definitely the community aspect of things were at the forefront when I decided to switch careers. At the end of the day, my thing is always about community. It's about helping people. It's about really trying to be as hands-on in meeting people's needs.
I feel like medicine embodies my passion for both health and social justice because I view health as a social justice issue. I always grew up with community organizing meetings, and they actually helped to start a support group for community-based health programs in the Philippines. And through that, I saw how you can approach health not just from a biological perspective, but how you can tackle the roots of inequality that produce health disparities. And so looking at health from this holistic perspective.
I don't really know when it started, actually. I used to tell everybody, when I was a little kid, I wanted to be a doctor. And I think I just had a really good experience, like most people. They had a good experience with their pediatrician. And they thought, like, oh, I want to do that. And so all through high school, I thought, I'm going to study medicine. And then in college, I actually started studying sciences, like hardcore, and I hated it. It was like painful. So I studied politics and international studies, Middle East, North Africa, studied abroad for a year. came back and was like, I'm gonna be in politics. When I was in Africa, I was a youth development volunteer. And so I was doing all these projects with young people in my town, like things that I saw, like hace falta, things that were in need, and everything I did was a public health project, everything. And I started thinking that maybe I'm really supposed to be doing medicine because I'm not really satisfied with all this political stuff. Something will always be kind of turned around. There has to be something else that I'm doing along with the politics.
Why did I decide to pursue medicine? I mean, everybody wants to be a doctor when they're a child, before society implants all that bad energy. You know, I think in 5th grade, I remember writing a paper about wanting to be a doctor in Africa, wanting to cure AIDS and cancer at the same time. But then I also wrote a paper about wanting to be an astronaut. So it was in my head when I was young. I remember having distinct conversations. I thought everybody wanted to be a doctor, like that's what you were supposed to choose. And then you grew up and things change and you realize you're poor and things are impossible. But then you also realize things are possible.
I always wanted to be a doctor since I was like in 6th grade. I always loved science. I always loved helping people. And so like as I made my journey along the academic preparation for medical school, in college I actually hit a roadblock because people were more interested in maximizing social connections and grades instead of actually helping people and preparing to be good doctors. So that's actually when I decided to kind of put the medical school option to the side, and I actually went into education. So right after I graduated, I became a teacher in East Oakland. I taught for 5 years, but as I started teaching, I realized I really loved teaching, but I knew that my heart was always in medicine.
At the same time that I was interested in sciences, I was also interested in football. And I was excelling pretty well in football. The issue is that it's really tough to put biology and football together. But then I stuck with football. Football took precedent. And I kept playing. I went from the University of Oklahoma and started my professional career, my very rocky professional career. I finally got picked up by the Raiders. They sent me to Europe. Europe was crazy. This was back when Europe had the NFL Europe. I was on a kickoff, running full speed to go make a tackle, and some poorly educated player hits me in the back, which is a very illegal move, illegal thing to do in football. I fall off balance. Instead of hitting the guy with my body, I hit him with just my arm. My arm flies back so fast, it tears my pec out of its insertion in the humerus. It kind of gave me like a year. You know, whenever you get serious injuries, you got to rehab them. This was my road to get to medicine finally. So I did some soul searching, and after my year rehab, I decided not to go back to football, but rather just to go learn Spanish. I told my father about it, and he had the foresight to give me an option that appealed to something a little deeper, you know, which was, you know, the will that I have to learn medicine and help people out. And he tells me about Cuba. He says, I've been trying to put my students on it forever. Not one of my students have decided to go through with the program, but I think it's something you might like. I checked it out online, and it had to be Cuba.
Yo soy Cuba, soy arena, soy pimienta, tabaco y ron, combinación perfecta. Y dale suero.
Mira, que si soy cubano, claro que sí.
I decided to come to Cuba because of, number one, Cuba has a tremendous reputation in the world for graduating well-trained doctors who are serving all over the world. Secondly, their reputation in primary healthcare is also excellent. It's something that they focus on, primary healthcare, prevention, preventative medicine. So those are things that definitely attracted me as well. A free medical program. I did undergrad. I still, to this day, have bills. I have bills from the classes that I had to go back and take in order to apply to the program out here. And so that was definitely a plus as well. And then being clear about stepping into a program where there are professors who are used to working in and being in situations where they don't necessarily have everything that they need. Because at the end of the day, the situation that I'm going to be going back to, the reality is that, you know, poor working class communities in the US as well as other places don't necessarily have all of the things that they need.
The program here in Cuba, Latin American School of Medicine, is a program that really integrates health as a social justice issue, and also in terms of the holistic view of medicine and health services, health access. It's not looking at it on just an individual level, but there's a big emphasis on public health and community health. This is actually what I majored in undergrad, and I also worked in community health and public health before starting medical school. So I felt like it encompassed a lot of my values and ideals.
I'm from an immigrant community in Queens, and back in the 80s, it was full of Colombians, full of Ecuadorians, Latin Americans, you had your Asians. Everybody was an undocumented worker, so nobody had health insurance. But there were always these doctors you could go to, and they were always Cuban, and I just always assumed that doctors meant Cubans, which is another story. But that's just where everybody went. All the doctors in the Queens community were Cuban, and they were the best because they didn't charge you, and they always gave you the free samples as your medicine. That's what my dad always would say to me. You've got to go to the Cubans. You've got to go to the Cubans. They were just always the doctors. As time progressed, you realize what reality is bringing to you, the debt, how impossible it is, and how many obstacles you have to jump. And then my sister just randomly told me, she was at the University of Albany and said, hey, so there's a free scholarship in Cuba. And we'd always said, we have to go to Cuba. We have to go to Cuba because we knew about the revolution, because we knew about the Cuban doctors who always helped everybody. They just never said no. And so she said, there's a scholarship, and it's actually, the head office is around the corner from your school, because I went to City College of New York in Harlem. And I was like, wow, this is crazy energy. So read the pamphlet, and everything I kept reading was like, yes, that's exactly why. Yes, that's exactly what I want to do. You know, I wanted to learn to be revolutionary. I don't really still know what that means, but you know, you always see people on TV and you hear the stories and you're like, revolutionary, that's cool, I want to do that. There has to be a school for that.
I was talking to a friend of mine who's she's a medical anthropologist, and she said, what are you going to do when you finish school? And I said, I really want to go to medical school, but I can't really afford it, I don't think, and I'm old. You know, it's just going to be weird. And she said, you should go to school in Cuba. And she told me all about it. And she said, it would be perfect for you because you love international work, and you will learn another language, and it's free. And I said, let me check that out.
When my family moved to Oceanside, my father got really sick. My mother also got really sick. And there was just a whole host of things that happened because of those sicknesses that I kind of became aware of all of the things that could go wrong. And I realized that there weren't mechanisms in place in our society for the people that really wanted something better for themselves or for their children. There weren't ways for them to get better, for example, if they had a mental illness, which was the case of my parents. And so I just realized that I knew when I went to medical school that I wanted to go to medical school where people just really cared about helping other people, right? And they were going to practice it in a humanistic way. Instead of looking at their patient as a potential profit, they were looking at their patient as a human being who's potentially suffering and who deserves to be treated and receive medical treatment at the highest quality that they can provide. And so I knew those things existed in Cuba. I had a full scholarship when I was at Harvard, and I had a great experience, received an incredible education, but when it was time for me to apply to medical school, I didn't want to repeat that experience again. So I did apply to medical schools in the US, but I also applied to this program. So when I was accepted into this program, it was a done deal for me.
It was medicine, but it was medicine here, you know? for everything that Cuba stands for, that revolutionary backbone that they have that's allowed them to stand straight when all type of hell has rained down on them in all type of ways. It was that. They have a particular way of giving the services, the healthcare services to their people that cuts down on overall costs, but at the same time, you know, still has everyone getting checked out, you know, and that's appealing to me. I'm seeing that, you know, not only do their doctors help their people, but these are some of the most well-known doctors worldwide, doing all type of medical brigades internationally. These doctors are going to Haiti. These doctors are going to all type of African countries. Cuba loves Africa. These doctors are going to Afghanistan. I find out that, you know, Cuban doctors played a huge role in apartheid South Africa and bringing it down. You know, it's like all these little tidbits of history that I knew about, you know, when I had breaks from reading playbooks, all these little bits of history that I was learning about, now I'm seeing the role that Cuba has been playing in it. And it's crazy because none of this stuff is anything that you're gonna get from history books, anything that you're gonna get from our news. It was me learning medicine, but me learning medicine outside of the States, which has a system that has its pros and cons, but, you know, learning from a really revolutionary model and a universal model. So by the time I heard about the program, it was kind of a no-brainer.
You're really stepping into a situation where you don't know what's going to happen. The only thing you do know is that you're going to study medicine and that you are going to have to speak a language that you don't speak.
What's it like? Is it totally free? But you have to do community service there. Do you get followed around for being American? If people want to know if Cuba's a police state, and then I show them pictures of all of us sitting at the Malecón or at the beach, or, you know, just interacting and sharing and having a totally normal experience. And it's surprising.
My expectations for going to Cuba, I thought pretty much was gonna be like a typical third world country. I thought that things would be really cheap. I thought that things would probably not work. Things wouldn't be like really efficient, that we wouldn't have access to air conditioning or running water. I mean, we possibly would have to sleep on the floor, that the books would be old.
Initially, you know, a lot of people thought this is a third world country. You think of a third world country as, you know, just dirt roads, people on the streets with, you know, barely no clothes. There's no cars, there's no running water. But, you know, it's just the opposite here. They have all of that. From my experience, what I see is it's not a third world country because of the resources that they have and how they manage them. They don't have all the resources that the states have there, you know, or other countries or other developed countries have, but they do manage them well. And I'm still trying to figure that out. I'm not sure how they do it, but they do it well. And they have health care for everybody. They have education for everybody. They have housing for everyone, you know, food. They provide for the people here.
I didn't know anything about Latin American culture. Like, I had spent a lot of time around friends of mine that were Mexican and Honduran, but I didn't really know anything about Latin American culture. Like, I thought that Cuba would be like, people would eat tortillas and they liked spicy food. I was dating this Haitian guy at the time, and I remember I was bringing all these spices, and he was like, "No, shoo, you know they're gonna have spicy food there. Why you bring all these things?" And I was just like, because, you know, I don't know what they have over there. And he was making me feel stupid. So I was like, yeah, you're right. I left it. Cubans don't like spicy food. So all my spicy stuff that I had from home, I had to leave.
I wouldn't say I wasn't very educated about Cuba. You know, I say I was right on par with most Americans. Luckily, because I grew up in a family that, you know, seeks the truth. I wouldn't say that I had a lot of misconceptions, but my ideas were infantile. You know, my ideas were baby ideas about Cuba. They needed a whole lot more developing. I knew that Cuba had a revolution. I knew that Fidel Castro has a beard. You know, I know that Fidel Castro was the head of that revolution, you know, and I know that they was popular for rum and cigars, you know, real basic stuff.
I think there was definitely the initial kind of fascination with Cuba beforehand because I didn't really know that much about it other than just kind of the culture that we see kind of on TV. And I was a dancer also, I was a hip hop dancer. And so finding out about Cuba, I always felt a connection. I know I wanted to be around folks that actually looked like me, but then spoke another language also. That was really exciting. But I didn't know much beyond that. I think what I first noticed about coming to Cuba was the heat, for sure. I mean, it seems to not be a big deal, but coming from San Francisco, where we got a nice temperate climate all the time, it was definitely the heat. And coming out of the airport, I also realized how different I felt everyone looked at first. And so that's the thing, was that first shock of realizing that as much as I had traveled initially, that I really hadn't seen the world yet. And so it was a nice reminder from the beginning that this was going to be an experience like I hadn't had before.
When you get to Cuba, the first thing that you do is, I mean, you feel Cuba. Actually, before you even get off the airplane, it's kind of crazy because, you know, the condensation is so tight. By the time they start cutting on the AC, it's almost like it condenses. I don't know what the heck's going on. It kind of looked like the stage back when Rick James would come out. The fog would, fill up the aisle. That's what the airplane aisle looked like. So they had some real different stuff. They gave me hard candies, which was something that I wasn't used to in the airplane. I had like negative leg room, in the airplane. There's little things that were starting to hint that I'm about to have a very unique experience. And once we landed, looking out the window, I mentioned the orientation that IFCO has. I was already around a lot of my friends from the orientation, so we're all excited, we're nudging each other, getting all pumped up. And we look out the window when we start to land, and we see just all this green. We land in Jose Marti Airport and see all these, palm trees, banana trees, and tractors and stuff, and it's obvious that, we're somewhere else. Getting off the plane, that humidity just kind of gives you a quick chest check, hits you real tough in the sternum, and you here. You are all the way here. You got folks smoking in the airport, different, you know what I'm saying? Just all these little things that you start to pick up, But more than all those little things, the general excitement, if I could put myself back in that moment, the general excitement of landing, being with friends that have been preparing for the same thing as you, and knowing that you are about to start something very special and that you're lucky. This isn't everybody going to Cuba. The highest concentration of Americans legally in Cuba are those of us who are in this medical school program. So, I mean, it's this feeling of gratitude. It's this feeling of excitement of what's about to happen, And it's just that more than all the rest of the little details, it was that on that airplane. Looking forward to, in my case, 7 years of med school, 7 years of transformation in this island.
Pero te puedo decir que el sentido de la medicina en Cuba tiene un sentido profundamente humanista.
Cuban medicine has a profound humanistic value. It is a humanistic principle that is provided by the doctor. There's no difference between treating a patient who has lots of money to one that doesn't. There are no differences between people who have more and people that don't have money. They are not different.
Well, the healthcare system in Cuba is a unique system that gives access to all. It's governed by the public health department such that care is administered on different levels. The first level is the primary level of healthcare, which is one of the prevention levels. It is strengthened by a whole pyramid of professionals that are part of this model. We have the secondary level, and this level is there to take care of people who are sick. Therefore, people who are already sick fall into this second level. And we have the third level. This level includes all the institutes, which are specialized centers to treat different diseases at any given time. In the primary level, on this level, in every neighborhood, there is a family doctor and nurse. And so the people who live in the neighborhood have access to go to their doctor or nurse for any condition, to be cared for and prevent diseases before having to go to the secondary level.
Well, it's a system that covers everything. It is very comprehensive. There are some deficiencies when it comes to resources, right? But the organization is well structured. There are concerns from the health authorities. For example, there are screening programs. Screening programs are to investigate, to detect diseases early, before they evolve into something fatal. For example, the screening program for cervical cancer. That's a program where the government organizes and provides resources to have it established in the primary level of healthcare. It's a program that starts when you're 20 years old, when women start having an active sex life. And that is when you screen for cervical cancer. Everything is free. It is guaranteed by the state. That's an example of a very interesting screening program for cervical cancer. There is also the mother-child program, which is why there are low rates of mortality like in developed countries. Because it's a government policy, all the resources are allocated. Early screening of pregnant women is organized in the primary healthcare level. And there, a woman is screened and monitored in order to detect risk factors for the pregnancy.
First off, one of the challenges is keeping our medical students at a high level of preparedness and professionalism. Secondly, providing an excellent level of service to the population. And thirdly, ensuring that the community has all the resources and has access to healthcare on all levels. All Cubans have the right to access any level of healthcare without having to pay. They can access the most sophisticated procedures for free. If they have a cardiovascular disease and have open heart surgery in a specialized institute, it is all absolutely free. And these are our challenges. Maintaining our health is one of the first pillars of our society: education, health, and sports. These are three important pillars of our society, and through that path, we are further shaping our healthcare system by raising the quality of our services provided with high levels of competency and professional and ethical performance from everyone working in this field.
Beyond just the polyclinics, they have what's called consultorios. So the consultorios are basically your local family doctor's office. So if you just imagine a house at the corner on your street converted into a waiting room in a doctor's office, that's what the consultorio is. And so the consultorio is made up of the equipo básico. And so the equipo básico is the local family doctor and the nurse that works with him or her. And so they attend to a certain amount of people in their área de salud, so that's their health area. And so they keep track of all the patients and all their charts. And aside from just seeing patients, they are also trained in epidemiological analysis because they keep track of, what are the prevalence and incidence of different diseases in the community. And based on what their percentages are, they have what's called a análisis de salud and a plan de acción. So from their health analysis, they make an action plan to target what are the main health concerns, and not even just health concerns, but what are the neighborhood concerns? Are there garbage disposals available? Are there things that are attracting, like mosquitoes? That's what I mean, like looking at health from a holistic perspective. Cuba is definitely an expert in doing that. And so what are all these different factors that contribute to health?
The Cuban approach to healthcare I think is one of the better systems in the world in that they have made a huge effort to educate the population about their own health, so people feel very empowered and feel very much like they are participating in their own health rather than kind of having to go to a doctor and not really understanding any part of the process. I think that Cuba has spent a lot of effort and a lot of money in preventative medicine, which is something that the American system doesn't focus on as much. And as a result, I think Cuba in general has a healthier population and is also more able to serve those who are actually sick. In addition, there's a little bit more resourcefulness and thought that goes into how they think about health, how they think about illness, how they diagnose problems. And so the cost is less as well, which I think is really important. It's one of the huge barriers facing us as a society in America right now.
When you first get here, you go to ELAM, which is it's the biggest medical school in the world. It's international, people from all the continents.
It's a stretched curriculum. Med school in the States is 4 years, here is 6 years, plus a pre-med half of year, plus a preparatory year if you need to learn Spanish and get your language skills up to par.
Medical school isn't easy anywhere. I mean, medicine is hard. And then learning it in another language. I'm Latina. We spoke Spanish at home. I grew up speaking Spanish. But one thing is chit-chatting with your grandmother, and another thing is understanding pathophysiology and reading it. And so it's intense. And there, rather than break apart the human body, you look at it like an integrated system.
And they always had these courses that really pounded home the community and the person. From the person, they get you learning them as a biological, psychological, and social being. And from the community, they show you just how that is an integral part, of the whole.
And then after the first 2 years, or if you do pre-med 3 years, you go to a hospital. It's called Salvador Allende officially, but all the people call it Covadonga. Everything in Cuba has 2 names. And you come into the city and you do the practical experience, the clinical years, which are 3rd, 4th, 5th, and a 6th intern year.
When you come to Allende, it's every day you're in the wards seeing patients, and it just really changes your dynamic of, okay, I'm here, I've made it to the other side of being an actual physician. Because when you walk in the hospital on the first day, you're a doctor. So when they see you in your white coat, it's like, okay, doctor, I need this, 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 and that. And it also changes the way you see the population and the way that you speak. It actually makes your Spanish better because every day you're with the patients.
Coming here, we had to automatically, immediately enter into the hospital situation. And it was a little bit, it was nerve-wracking, like the first year. How did I get over it? Practice. Every day with patients, you forget about it. You forget about being insecure and nervous.
It's so much work that you have to do, you really can't focus on anything. So it was just like, okay, well, breathe, now just you get your independence and a little bit, and then you just keep it moving.
Our professors, they have a very high standard, and they really expect you, and they know you can live up to that responsibility. They know that about you, so they encourage that in you.
Porque eso es súbito y no hay arreglo. Sí, a los 3 meses.
She came in fractured hip. She also had bronchopneumonia, and so has been really just fighting and recovering since she came in. ¿Tiene expectoración?
No, ni tos tampoco, ni fiebre. Me van a poner vitamina, me dijo, de 12, de 6, de...
O sea, ¿cuántos años tiene?
¿Cuántos
años tiene?
Ay, sí, 90. No, 90. 90.
90.
90,
90 años, 90. 90. Y luchando. Her fractured hip is healing well. and she had bronchopneumonia that has also been cured. So we were just talking about things that can be done nutritionally to sort of make up for low red blood cells for the anemia. Gracias, José.
La clave tiene sentido, tiene alma y tradición, tiene el secreto de nuestros ancestros. Abele, bele, bele, le, a la, la. La clave tiene sentido, tiene alma y tradición.
I think my experience in the program has truly been transformative. And it tends to kind of be something that sounds a little bit cliche, but I think until you really are in an experience like this, you don't quite understand what that means. I think that the biggest thing was definitely studying with people from all over the world, for sure, and learning Spanish and getting to actually be fluent in Spanish. It's like a whole other world kind of opened up to me. And now I can't imagine not speaking it. And if anything, I'd like to be able to speak even more languages. And also studying with all the other students from the States. These were obviously going to be people that I was going to be friends with for the rest of my life, for sure. I think in the beginning, it was definitely just the initial shell shock of being in a new place, kind of learning the culture, figuring out what the food was going to be like, and kind of the daily activities of just being in a new place. But I came 2 months early and really worked on my Spanish before starting class. So I feel like by the time school started, I was actually feeling really comfortable. And I remember the first day of actual class in school and hearing the professor start the lecture. And I remember looking around at everybody else and I was thinking, is this weird to anybody else? I'm like, she's speaking in Spanish the whole time. Like, everyone else is okay with this? I just really thought I was the only one who noticed it, and I obviously was because all my classmates spoke Spanish. And I gathered myself quickly, but it was fun, actually. It was fun to be on that beginning part of the journey and to be very aware of that part of the journey.
No, para nada. Para nada. Buena, ¿cómo está?
The experience as far as like the student relations aspect is, I imagine, really different here. There's a huge variety of students, international students, and then students from the States, like a wide cross-section of people from a bunch of different places, a bunch of different backgrounds, a bunch of different cultural identities, all kinds of identities, not even limiting it to culture. And there's a cooperative spirit that's fostered here. And so it's kind of like being on another planet, in a lot of ways, and we all have to figure out how to survive here. But then there's also just this, like I said, this spirit, a cooperative spirit where we're encouraged to share. For instance, you can be in a group with somebody, and if somebody's falling behind, or if somebody's, just not getting it, the question is posed to the rest of the group, like, why aren't you helping this person? And it's not like we're in direct competition with each other in the way that studies are geared in the States more. Like you have this rank and you're in direct competition with each other. It's like, why aren't you helping this person to figure it out? Because at the end of the day, we all need to heal somebody. That's a patient. That represents a patient who's going to receive inferior care if you don't help this person. So we're definitely encouraged to help each other out. I think the strongest part of the training here is the clinical experience, hands down. We are encouraged to talk to patients, to touch patients, to really explore what's going on. I think that here, there's really a lot of time to get to know clinical practice and to become very comfortable with it. And there are fourth-year students catching babies and suturing up after surgeries. So we really get in there. We get our hands dirty, bloody. I think it's going to be a huge benefit later on.
It's not hard to have fun here. It's really easy. We're such a unique group of people, and everybody has a shining personality and stand out in their own way, and we come from such diverse backgrounds, and we're all very different people, so that's very entertaining. So I think just amongst ourselves from the US, there's infinite entertainment there. But then on top of that, there's a whole nother culture to get to know. There's the dancing and the music and the fun in the streets. People are just out in the streets in Cuba. That's one of the most striking differences from like my neighborhood back home is come 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the evening, the streets are full, the kids are kicking a ball around. Cuban people are very inviting. They will ask you to come into their house and they'll offer to you whatever they have. So the reception is warm and the people are friendly. I'm not scared when I'm in Cuba. Like, I feel like the Cuban people, they take care of me. They're looking out for me too. There's a desire to kind of get to know what's going on a personal level. Like, you're a person. I hear it so often, like, the US people are good. You know, the Cubans are on our side. They want to get to know us. They recognize that we're friendly. We're here to learn from them because they've really got it organized here.
There's been a number of challenges that, that have come up in Cuba. First and foremost, language, having to learn Spanish, having to learn medicine in Spanish, and the level of confidence that I think comes with learning and mastering a language. And I'm very far from having mastered it, but you fight. That's the only thing you can do, right? You fight with it, you love it, you hate it, then you love it again, and you just keep going, and do what you have to do. If the words are not there, or if the words are there but you don't know what they mean, then you find another way of learning, right? And figuring it out. There's been times where, I'm just like, Spanish is just working my brain too much. I need to escape from Spanish for a moment. But this is in the middle of class and you're being lectured in Spanish and you can't go away. You have to continue. And that's not the last class of the day. You still have 2 more. And so, it's something that tries you on so many levels, but you're forced to stay in it.
We put in this huge sacrifice to do this work because we see the benefit that we're going to have, we see the impact that we're going to have when we go back home, and we know who we're doing it for. Yet there's always that fear of having been gone for so long and also not living the day-to-day experiences and the really big experiences of what's happening in our country while we're here. I speak Spanish now. I'm not going to be able to share that with my family if I have kind of 2 groups of folks that I can be with, and I want to be able to include all the experiences here. But how do you really describe this to somebody who hasn't been here with you those whole 6 years?
Well, it's not easy to be a foreigner every day, which was something that I was not mentally prepared for when I came here. It's an adjustment that I've had to make over the years. I wouldn't say that I'm entirely adjusted still, because I still wake up every day, and when I leave my front door, I'm a foreigner. Or if I ask a question to somebody on the street, the answer to the question is usually, where are you from? No matter what the question was, the answer is, where are you from?
I think that for me, coming into the program a little bit older than a lot of the other students here, has been challenging. And so a lot of the students here would have been the students that I taught in high school. And so it's almost like, I'm in class with my own students. And normally I'd be able to say, all right, bye, see y'all tomorrow, and go back to my own life. You can't do that here. You're in class with them, and then you go back to the dorm with them. And it just continues.
So the steps to get into residency, it's a lot of steps. They actually call it steps 1, 2, and 3. So we have to take our medical licensing boards, the same board exams that U.S. students that study at U.S. med schools. So anybody that wants to practice in the U.S. has to take these series of licensing exams. And so you can't apply to residency programs until you've passed all of those exams. It's also costly. So that's another challenge in terms of financial resources.
It's always funny because the challenges that I feel like I've dealt with are also the things that make this program invaluable. But learning medicine in Spanish, not being able to express my personality, oftentimes not being able to even express my knowledge base because it's in Spanish, it can be really frustrating. And I came for that reason because I felt like those were the kind of challenges I would need when I became a doctor, the kind of doctor that I'd want to be. And then I think one of the other difficult things, the things that have been difficult for me is seeing how the United States blockade and the financial limitations that the country has, how that influences how Cuban citizens actually move on a day-to-day when it comes to necessity and survival, the kind of things that individuals will do in order to quote unquote survive. I see it where I'm from in certain communities where resources are limited, those kind of frustrations and the kind of manipulation that might happen as a result of that. Because it's not new to me, it's not necessarily something that I can't deal with, but it's frustrating to see because you know that it doesn't necessarily have to be that way.
It can be a challenge at ELAM because, you're so far away from your family. You don't really know anybody. You're just learning the language. You're kind of isolated out there in Baracoa on this campus. And, it can kind of present a certain level of intimidation. And at that point, I was like, okay, I'm kind of doubting whether I actually want to stay here and pursue medicine. But so when Katrina happened,
no water, no ice, no sea rashes, nothing for the last 4 days. Dead people around the walls of the convention center, laying in the middle of the street. Babies, 2 babies, dehydrated and died. I just tell you, I couldn't take it.
The government said, you go here and you'll get help, or you go in that Superdome and you'll get help, and they didn't get help. They got locked in there, and they watched people starving, and they watched elderly people not get any medicine.
And I saw how quickly the Cubans organized this brigade of disaster medicine trained healthcare professionals and doctors. They mobilized 1,600 doctors, and they were all at the ELAM campus in Baracoa, the day after Katrina happened. So, I'm hearing all of these stories of how bad the flooding was, how many people were dying, and, just all of these things that were deeply affecting me, and that, there was nobody there, to really help that situation in a way that I saw, the Cubans mobilize so quickly. I mean, they had planes at the school. They had all of these doctors there with their bags packed. They solicited myself and 2 other people who had graduated from universities in New Orleans to give a seminar on the different things that make it, a unique place, stuff that they would need to know upon going in there. And it was just amazing to me that they were able to do that fast. And then, of course, all of that got rejected. So, it was very inspiring for me to actually stay here because that's the kind of medicine I want to do.
So I think probably one of the biggest barriers to entry into medical school is cost. Assuming you majored in a science and took all the prerequisites, then you can start applying to medical school. You have to take your MCATs, which you have to prepare for. It costs money to prepare for them. It costs money to take the actual test. You have to then apply to all the schools, and each application to a school costs, when I was applying, it was $80 to $100 for each school that you wanted to apply to. It's probably more now. So, and most advisors say that you should apply to anywhere between 20 and 25 schools. So it adds up really quickly. If you get interviews and you're lucky enough to get interviews, then you have to fly to each of those places. You have to find a hotel to stay at. You have to buy a suit to go interview. There's all of these little costs that come up, and so it ends up being an incredibly expensive process. In addition, you have to take time off from work to do this, or time off from school. A lot of people, like myself, are lucky enough to have family financial support, but I think a lot of people don't, and I think it makes it very difficult to apply to medical school.
Having the ability to have a debt-free life after graduation within medicine is very liberating on a number of scales. For one, I can actually choose kind of where I want to go and do what I want to do, and actually focus in on working exactly where I want to work as underserved community. Many doctors in the United States, that is their biggest concern, is being able to work in places where they can actually make a difference, but then still make an income.
So my debt definitely affects me on a daily basis. I have a lot of it, and I didn't really go into medicine thinking about debt or thinking that debt would affect me as much as it has. I went into medicine because I wanted to work for underserved populations, but I get paid a lot less than my colleagues who work with patients who have private insurance. And it's a commitment that I've made, and it's something that I want to continue to do, but it gets hard, and I think paying back loans and paying back debt is something that weighs more and more heavily on me as I get older and closer to having a family.
In other places that I've been, that I've lived in the US, the main problem is access. Working people, poor people not having access to healthcare and or not having access to quality healthcare.
My parents don't have access to medical care. My mom should be getting mammograms every year, and she hasn't had one in, say, 7 or 8 years. My dad just started getting screening for colon cancer because he is 65 now, and he's allowed to. He's got access to medical care right now, but the incidence increases dramatically in your 50s. So our problem is not that it's not a lack of medicine, it's not a lack of medical care, it's a lack of access to medical care and a lack of focus on prevention.
In our world, in our medicine, because it is so hard to get access to physicians, so it becomes very challenging to educate them on the most pertinent things and deal with all their issues in one simple, short, very concise visit. I feel like that's the biggest challenge. Giving the patient the quality time they need in the time that you have allotted for that.
I like to think of the Affordable Care Act as both the good and the bad. And I think when you look at the overall system, the Affordable Care Act got us somewhere in that more people are insured, which is great. But I don't think it's the insurance we need. I think the insurance we need is a single payer system, and I think the insurance we need is one that takes away profiting from out of the system. When you're thinking about healthcare and health, it should be treated as a utility. And as long as we're having this perspective of people profiting off of poor health, we're never really going to be able to cut down costs and never really going to be able to focus on health in the way that we, I think, as a society want to. As a result, one of the things that we've seen in the last few years is that insurance premiums have actually gone up. So this is because there's nothing that's controlling how we're spending our money in medicine. So people are actually, now they may be insured, but they're having to pay more for that insurance. So that's a huge burden on them. It's placing the emphasis on treatment rather than prevention. And there's some things that they're trying to do to place an emphasis on prevention, but we're just not thinking about that in that way.
So the only thing that the help that I received in Cuba was just getting one of my wisdom teeth taken out right before, the day before a test. I thought I was just gonna go for a checkup on it, and she said, would you like to get your tooth taken out? And I said, sure. I had actually put it off when I was at home because it was so expensive to be able to get it done. I don't actually have health insurance at home, and so getting a tooth pulled is like, you know, pulling an arm and a leg. It's a serious investment. So I got my tooth pulled, and the next day, no complications whatsoever. I went to take my test and was completely fine. But I also got the experience of having my husband get his eye laser surgery here. And he used to wear glasses and now has better vision than I probably ever had. And that was actually really great to see. He, of course, had put that off until he got here. And it was incredibly easy. And he came out within a few days, was seeing fine. And now I forget that he even used to wear glasses.
I had a staph infection break out on my leg. And so it was just from like scratching my leg. It turned into this abscess and had a fever spike. So at that point, what you want to try and do is not let that infection seed in other parts of your body. And so I spent a week in the hospital on the school campus in ELAM and got the medical attention that I needed. I was in a group room with other students. There was somebody there with a slipped disc in their back. There was another girl that was receiving like an orthopedic procedure where they were making one of her long bones in her legs grow longer by separating it and moving it with screws a little bit out each day, and the bone was growing in between. There was a pregnant girl in the room. It was just a very diverse group of students from their pathologies, but also from the countries that they were from, the Uruguay and Ecuador and Mexico and myself, and then all their boyfriends and friends. It was a party, except for at 8 o'clock every night, they would come by and they would give me a sharp injection in the booty. And I tell you, like, it was hard and it hurt. But they were there and they gave me the medication that I needed. They gave me the attention that I needed, and they got me out of there in a week. It was a good experience. Yeah, I'm glad that happened to me, that I was subjected to the education that I'm receiving, subjected to the medical system of the education that I'm receiving. Yeah, it was a unique experience. It was my birthday and spring break.
In the United States, I very seldom got medical care outside of what I was doing with football. And football gave me a misconception on how people receive their health care. I had not only trainers at my beck and call, but I also had kinesiologists and then doctors as well that were all there to make sure that I was in tip-top shape so that I can make money for the organization, basically. And they invested in that, you know, tip-top treatments whenever I needed it. You know, if I had inflammation in my knees, I'm not waiting for a receta or a prescription. I'm just getting it, booyah, quick. If I had a surgery, you know, when I tore my pec, in no time, they flew me from Germany all the way to Birmingham, Alabama, had me operated on in no time, you know, by a top surgeon. A very distorted view of what United States healthcare is, and you figure that out when you get off the team. Because in needing to fulfill the requirements, the application requirements to get to this school, I had to go in, just get some real basic tests done. But having left the team, I didn't have health insurance. So now I find myself in this trap, trying to call in favors from friends, friendly doctors. Hey, can you see me here? Can you see me there? Just the difficulties to try to get some basic lab exams done. So now I'm in Cuba, right? Cuba, I have experienced the necessity, you know, to have the healthcare services a couple times. As far as going to the pharmacy, I have had really, really good experiences with that. Folks, when they have the drugs that you need, they're there for you. You know, it's real quick. However, when it comes to you needing specialized healthcare treatment or procedures done, that can be tricky. And why is it tricky? It's tricky because Cuba's situation right now with resources is tricky, but it affects everywhere from, you know, the top of the healthcare pyramid all the way down to everybody needing to get different services. You know, I had a wart that grew on my arm that was just real persistent, and I needed somebody with this like little electrical, you know, like laser to burn it off. And that process took me about 3 months. because maybe there wasn't electricity one day, or maybe the equipment that they had was so old it wasn't working that day. And it was just that back and forth nature of that experience that it weighed on me. And it let me understand a little bit deeper into the Cuban person's experience, all that goes into needing to get your healthcare services. Doors are open. Doors will always be open. But that doesn't mean that the shelves are going to be filled or even the lights are going to be on until we get to a place where we don't find it necessary to penalize Cuba for their want to do things perhaps a little different than the way that we do them in the United States. And what's up with Cuba? We're still behind this. Why?
Talking about the political history of U.S.-Cuba relations is a complicated thing because there's a lot that happens and a lot of different factors that intervene to affect what's been a really intractable situation for the last more than 50 years. When the Cuban Revolution happened in 1959, the Cubans see that as part of the longer trajectory of theirs toward independence and sovereignty of their island, and that's something that the United States government has always resisted. Back in the day of what we call the Spanish-American War, but here it's called the Cuban Spanish-American War. That had partly to do with the control of Cuban territory. Later, there were occupations, there were financial business interests that took over here in Cuba. There was something called the Platt Amendment that the US government pressured the Cuban government to have an amendment in its own constitution that the US government could intervene in Cuba's affairs at any time. So when the revolution happened in 1959 and Cuba was saying we want to be even more independent than we've been and we don't want a puppet government from the United States, the US resisted that and set in place some trade sanctions against Cuba. Cuba, according to what it has said, maintained the interest in staying open to relating to any country in the world. But with the US trade sanctions and the economic situation in the US and with the Cold War and the polarization of the political situation around the world, Cuba turned its economic attention toward the Soviet bloc and did most of its trade there. So that the freezing of relations with the US didn't affect Cuba too much until the early 1990s, when the Soviet bloc disappeared. And when that happened, Cuba lost a whole bunch of its trade overnight. Cuba had been very prosperous then, living in a subsidized economy where folk had access to free education, free healthcare, free monthly food supplies, everything was subsidized for the people. And although incomes were low, people lived very, very comfortably. And the government could do that because of the benefit of the trade relations with the Soviet Union. The Cubans were buying oil for low prices and they were selling sugar and tobacco for high prices. And with that, they could import most of their food and they were very comfortable. When the Soviet bloc disappeared, several politicians in the US put forward a new bill in the Congress that made the trade restrictions even tighter. And the Cubans dug in to resist the economic conditions in the early 90s that were created by the intensification of the blockade and the loss of the Soviet trade. They called that the special period in peacetime because it was like a war, but it wasn't really a war. It was an economic war. And folk here made do with so little in terms of economic resources. Anything that had to be imported wasn't here. There was no fuel to run the vehicles. You would be in downtown Havana, there wouldn't be any cars on the street. Food was in very, very short supply. Everybody got skinny. But the miraculous thing, and my first visits to Cuba were in the early 90s, right in this time, the miraculous thing was that they dug in and helped each other. They thought of everything as a group challenge. They invented new ways to solve problems. They wrote songs about the fact that they had to ride the bicycles instead of being in their cars. And with a dignity and a strength and a sense of cooperation, they came through that hard period. And their economy started improving. Since then, some exceptions have been made to the blockade, but the trade restrictions are still there. Recently, in the last couple of years, President Obama has loosened some of the travel restrictions. But it's still true that if somebody from the US wants to come to Cuba, they have to get some kind of special permission from the US government. And the US government claims some kind of right to supervise the program. And that applies to everybody from somebody who's selling food for Archer Daniels Midland to Beyonce and Jay-Z when they were just here. There was a big stink about whether they were allowed to be here or not. Now, some of us who know Cuba and really care about Cuba think that part of the issue here is that folk in the United States are afraid we're going to come here and see that even though the Cubans don't have a lot of money, it is possible to have universal health care. That even though they don't have a lot of money, it's possible to have free education. It's possible to rearrange your resources so that the money goes toward the needs of the people rather than towards the folk who are trying to siphon off the top. So that's why for us, every time we're here, we learn more about Cuba, and we've been so committed to challenging the blockade and letting Cuba be free to be what it deserves to be.
When I first decided that I wanted to study medicine, when I first told myself and felt confident enough to even say to myself, I want to be a doctor and I can go through medical school, I pretty much went online and looked up information, and IFCO's website popped up. And so I read some stuff and went and called. And from that point on, that sort of started a continual and constant communication with IFCO about the program and everything else that was involved in the process.
IFCO handled the whole application process for me. IFCO has, for decades, stood on the right side of history, how their program Passes for Peace, how they really put pastors in what, in my opinion, is their rightful role, which is being true advocates of their people, and not just people who could stand behind a podium and give a really good sermon, but people who are going to go out to Nicaragua, and put their life on the line.
So IFCO was founded in 1967 by progressive church and community activists who wanted to provide support for people as they were fighting on a variety of different kind of social justice campaigns. It was founded by my father, the late Reverend Lucius Walker, who was a Baptist pastor, community organizer, who was really interested in merging the two, his ministry and his commitment to social activism through his community organizing work. And it's really been an organization that at its most basic level has been about supporting people as they are struggling to make change in their community, on their community levels. And that's been a project that has taken IFCO from the streets of various parts of the United States and then internationally. The scholarship program that Cuba has generously provided for not only people in the United States, but people across the globe continues to be a gift that we like to say that keeps on giving. We at IFCO were fortunate to have been in place when the offer was initially made. There was a delegation of members of the Congressional Black Caucus that were visiting Cuba, and there was a congressman from Mississippi, Benny Thompson, who was really talking about the health disparities in Mississippi and the lack of doctors that exists there. And it was then President Fidel Castro who opened and provided this initial opportunity for people from Mississippi to come and to study at the Latin America School of Medicine. From there, the offer expanded to, of course, be what it is today, one in which people from across the United States can take advantage of this wonderful 6 to 7 year scholarship program in which they come to Cuba, train to become community doctors, to become revolutionary doctors, to become physicians that will return to the United States and provide much needed health care. And we have been blessed to be the entity, we IFCO, the entity to help facilitate the recruitment of these young people. We are now putting together efforts to work with them as they return to determine ways that we can be supportive when they get back to the United States. My father wore many different hats. He was a teacher, a social worker, ordained Baptist minister, a community activist, really committed to working to provide social justice. Those aspects of his personality, I think, led to the creation of a project that we refer to as Pastors for Peace. And Pastors for Peace was born actually on a river in Nicaragua in the 1980s. We were taking a delegation of people from the United States to Nicaragua to help understand the reality of the situation in Nicaragua. This was at a time when Ronald Reagan was in the White House. He was lifting up support for the Contras, people who had been victimizing the Nicaraguan people for decades. And we were taking people to the region to really explore and understand and witness themselves the reality on the ground there. And it was during a study delegation in Nicaragua in 1988 on a regularly scheduled passenger ferry that was attacked by the Nicaraguan Contras. It was along the Rio Escondido that this attack began. In the water, this boat began to violently shake from side to side. In the end, there were 2 people who were killed and people who were wounded. And one of the wounded was my father. He was taken to the hospital and while there, prayed for a response. He wondered, how do we initiate a response to an act of terror that's been paid for by your own tax dollars? And literally in the morning, he announced the formation of Pastors for Peace. And he declared that Pastors for Peace would be a project through which there would be a people's foreign policy, a project that would allow us to travel through various parts of the United States, collecting humanitarian aid and educating people about the reality in Nicaragua, and making our way back to Nicaragua with this aid and as an act of love and solidarity. And so the Contra attack took place in August of 1988, and the first caravan arrived in Nicaragua on Christmas Eve of 1988. It was a caravan of vehicles, computers and medical supplies, school supplies, Bibles, bicycles. It was a ragtag group of folk who just said, not in our name. We're not going to allow the government at that time to impose a policy of pain and suffering against our neighbors in Nicaragua. And every year after that, IFCO would return with a caravan of humanitarian aid. And it was a pastor in Cuba by the name of Reverend Raul Suarez. He ran the Martin Luther King Center in Cuba. He approached my father and asked him if he would consider organizing a similar initiative to Cuba. Now, we knew to do a caravan to Cuba would require a whole level of negotiating and logistical balancing, given the fact that the U.S. government had imposed a blockade and embargo. And we knew that to do so would mean challenging our government. It would mean the possibility of facing fines, prison. Still, we organized that first caravan in 1992 and have been organizing these U.S.-Cuba French shipment caravans ever since.
Good evening. We have a developing story, a breaking news story tonight. A major earthquake has hit Haiti to the south and east of the U.S. and Cuba, magnitude 7.0, making it the largest quake ever recorded in this region.
We had just graduated a few years prior. The earthquake really destroyed pretty much most of the nation. I remember watching a program and they were saying, well, you're sending all this stuff, but who's gonna actually administer this? Where's the doctors? Where's the this? And I just remember being like, this is our time to like be a part of this. But Reverend Lucius Walker at the time was, how do we send the doctors over? How do we get the doctors there to Haiti? And just mobilizing a network and getting the funding and making it possible. And he, put out the call, is there anybody willing to go to Haiti at this time? And as he put that call out, there were 7 women at the time, particularly that said, I'm prepared to go. And I know at that time I was working, but I was trying to find a way of how to leave my job, take a leave of absence for that month or so without pay, just to kind of go and do that. And they wouldn't give it to me. So I said, I'm prepared to go. And so I quit my job at that time to make the transition to go to Haiti and to work. And that experience was such a phenomenal experience. One, because I think it was at the essence and core of what Cuba had taught us. In 5th year, one of our classes was disaster mitigation. And everybody just, you kind of groaned and like, why are we learning this? What is going on? And it's, taking apart a disaster, how to effectively come up with plans and proposals and set things in place to mitigate that disaster and going through the stages of that. And so it was so funny because when we first got off the ground, I remember I was like, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that. And that key class was like, everybody was moaning and groaning about taking it, but it was so essential. And I knew that then and there that was the purpose of why, some of the reason of why I had gone to Cuba. It was to learn a different type of medicine that had social structure to it, that had community building to it. And every single thing that I learned in that class, we literally applied on the ground in Haiti. Cuba was preparing us in our training to come up against any force, any natural disaster, and how do I work in that element and still continue to do what I need to do as a physician, as a person in this community to build it back up. When we got to Haiti, we actually stayed in Croix Bouquet, and we were there. They had set up like almost like a tent city within our tent city. We transformed a huge park into our living quarters, our dining room quarters, our working quarters. We set up huge tents to do our lab work in, our ultrasound work in. We set up tents in the back to be surgical spaces to actually treat patients who we had to do surgery on, or obstetric patients that we had to actually deliver babies for. We actually became one of the main centers that many of the women would come to in Haiti to deliver their babies for a portion of time. And so it was like, how do you transform this park space into a hospital, living quarters, everything else, and to see that transfer basically overnight. I mean, the Cuban doctors were like plying wood, cutting down boards. How do we set up this structure? We were putting up tents. It was amazing. And then, you know, a few days later, we're literally seeing 500 plus patients a day. For me, one particular experience that comes to mind is a little boy, and his mom came and she's running to the hospital trying to get help, and just hearing that mom say, I walked for days to get here because there's no doctor where I live. And in her walking days, still arriving to the place but not in enough time to save her baby, it tore me apart in a way that this is happening in a global community that is also my community. It may not happen here on that blatant level, but it does happen here because there's so many women and children in our community that don't have access to healthcare, that don't have access to the quality of healthcare even when they have access to insurance. So how do you, as this person who lives in this community, change that and become passionate about changing that?
The experience of actually getting into residency is really exciting. It's neat to apply everything that I've been learning in Cuba and actually be able to get into the American system and see patients. It's medicine. What we learned in Cuba, it's medicine when I'm practicing here in the US. I felt like they fully prepared me in every way to be able to listen and treat my patients and help them to be healthy and active.
So I'm a second-year resident here at Woodhull Medical and Mental Health Center in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. We're a public hospital that serves 3 communities, really. We sit in the center of Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, Bushwick, and Williamsburg. We're a hospital that 40% of the patients that we see are uninsured. We take care of the disproportionate share of the uninsured in this community, just to give you a sense. So we take care of the most needy in New York City.
The community needs a lot of healing from different aspects. You know, medically, it needs to be healed just dealing with the different comorbidities that the patients face. And also in terms of social aspects, because, you know, we need to realize as doctors, you can't just give a patient a medicine and expect them to get better. There's a whole lot of different things that goes into making someone well. And Cuba definitely helped us learn the biopsychosocial method of treating a patient, which is biologically dealing with the medicine, secondarily you deal with the psyche, and then lastly you deal with the social aspects. And so I think that once you have a community healing on all 3 levels, it makes for a better patient.
Coming from a system in which the doctor is fully integrated, incorporated, a part of the community, leads you to understand the folks who you're taking care of better. Even today, the wife of a patient who I'd taken care of within the intensive care unit, she stops me and, doctor, Spanish speaking, just wanted to tell me how well her husband was doing, how he had, bounced back from when we had taken care of him. It's not so much seeing, that one patient, but for me, it's very gratifying knowing that you're becoming part of a larger community and a larger family. To me, that was always the most important. It's not, I'm a doctor, you're the patient, I'm the doctor, you're the community, you listen to me, but I leave and I don't get on the same bus as you, I don't get on the same train as you, we're completely separate. It's to say that we may have different functions, but at the same time, we're very much interconnected. And I think that was just today was very gratifying. And we get that on the day-to-day just by saying, I take care of you and I forget about you later. No, it's I take care of you, and I think about when I see you on the street, are you still well? And you can always come up to me and, share whatever problems you have with me.
I think that people deciding to go to study in Cuba need to realize that it's a real decision. And so it has to be an understanding of personal sacrifice, but also knowing that it's greater than just you being a doctor. You're coming back to community, you're coming back to heal people, and you're also coming back to uplift people, because a lot of times seeing somebody that is of a black or brown color being a physician is very rare for some people, especially myself being a woman. Sometimes people see me and they're like, oh, you're a doctor? And I'm like, I absolutely am, and it's something that kind of at times bothers me, but it really makes me realize what my purpose is to change the perception of what medicine is and what reality is.
But we have to crack the system. So that means working your tail off, and that means providing high quality care. And also from understanding that what you do is more than just medicine. What you do is also you work for the public good, and being an advocate of communities, not just treating individuals, but also working on behalf of the community.
We've come back from Cuba being very humbled, just being very humbled. So when we served medicine, we trained with doctors that did not make hundreds of thousands of dollars. They may have not been rich in material goods, but in knowledge, they were basically walking libraries. And we were able to, get taught by some of the best physicians. So we come humbled. There's no attachments. The people that taught us, they just were doing it because they had a love for medicine. We had so many professors that would tell us, no, you need to know this because all we have is this medicine that we're teaching you. All we have is this. We need you to go back and make sure that these underserved people get taken care of. And it was a phenomenal experience. I look back on it and it was so enriching and fulfilling. It makes me so happy to speak about it.
Public health, I feel like, is largely about education and communication. And Cubans have just done a wonderful job with that in almost every single way. The polyclinic system, where everybody has their family doctor and it's close by, and that person has evaluated the health risks. They do this thing called dispensarización. They know everybody in the neighborhood and what is their level of health. If this person already has a disease, if this person has a propensity to get a disease, and it helps keep medical costs down, and it helps prevent diseases that are life-threatening. And so that's why Cubans have similar health outcomes to us, even though they have no money. It's just ridiculous how good it is.
For me, being out here, learning medicine it's been a tremendous experience. It's definitely been a challenge because it teaches you strength. It teaches you to fight because you have to. We are working and serving other people who need our help, so you have to fight. You learn to be adaptive. You learn to be creative. You learn to be prepared for anything.
I like that at anytime they begin a question is, if you were in the mountains, what would you do? Whether you're talking about gangrene, gout, hypertension, whether it's treatment, diagnosis, or overall process, if you were in the mountains. So I'm ready for a lot of things. And that's what I find so interesting. It is so dynamic. You have to learn that medicine to understand everything. And so you don't need those very large machines, those expensive machines. We have them, and sometimes we use them, and sometimes they're broken, and sometimes they're working. What I find interesting is that sometimes doctors can just roll in, look at you just real quick, and already have something going on. Well, his hue is a little off. That's mind-boggling. You didn't have to go take his blood test. Oh, you're right, his bilirubin is really high. What's going on? Because if you're in the mountains, I can't give you a blood test, but I can look at the hue of your skin.
So for me, the value of an ELAM degree is multifaceted. As a doctor, you have to have this whole cosmopolitan, global perspective in life. And you living with a bunch of different people from all over the world is just, you can't put a price on that. There's no money that you can even amount to that. So having walked away with that, number one. Number two, just the value of, yeah, you're walking away without any debt, and that's very nice. And being able to do the thing that you really, really want to do at any given moment. The other thing is, in the United States, you have to kind of walk through layers. So, you know, you get exposed to one thing and then you watch one, do one, teach one type of deal. It's kind of what happens here. There, it's kind of like, you put some gloves on, you're going to be doing, you're going to teach you while you're doing there. And you're being observed while you're doing those things. So they're teaching you how to do things right and on the fly. There's times where I was, do these long guardias, whatever, the night shift, and you're dealing with a surgeon, the head surgeon of the whole place. And his wife brings in a sandwich, and there's 5 of us in the room, 4 med students and the head doc, and he divides up his sandwich for the night that his wife brought, and we're all hungry, but he shares. And this is the head surgeon of the hospital, right? And so you definitely learn that, like, teamwork, sharing, and that we're all in this together is so important. And that's how that program really inspired me most of all, was figuring out a way. There's always some type of contribution that you can make. Whatever resources you have, you can always contribute.
What makes me hopeful about the future of medicine in the U.S.? There's a community of folks that are addressing this issue of health as a human rights issue, as a basic social justice issue, and fighting to get those rights that people deserve.
I'm hoping that healthcare will get to the point where a worker somewhere in a kitchen somewhere burns himself and can go to the hospital without a problem and doesn't have to say, no, don't worry. I'm not gonna get anything. It'll cost too much money. It'll take too long. The cops will come get me. You know, I'm sick of people feeling like there's no help, like this is it. My arm is broken. I have nothing. I have no money. I have no insurance. I now have to walk around for the rest of my life with a crooked arm. I don't think that we deserve that.
Being a doctor is a huge responsibility, especially in a community. I don't know if that's necessarily something that we always get in the United States. I think that that's something that's very well understood here, where a doctor is more like a social worker back at home, somebody who applies what's in their head to what's in their heart. And there's a saying here. I'm going to say it in Spanish first, and then I'll translate it in English. El médico que se confunde, ¿qué cosa es? Un asesino. The doctor who gets mixed up, what is he or she? An assassin, a murderer. So it's a big deal. You got to be on point, and you've got to take what's in your head and then really let it come out through your heart.
When I finish here, I definitely plan on working in an underserved community. And I think it's important that the education that I will have received here forms the foundation of the medicine that I will be practicing. Because at the end of the day, you have to maintain your focus on your patient, regardless as to how much money may be offered to you, regardless of the shortcomings in the system.
The reason why medicine works so well here is because of political will. You can't have a society like ours, and we say like we're the greatest country in the world or whatever, but our society does not take care of the least. This society, people care about people's health first. I thought maybe it was because they have better doctors, or maybe it was because they just have more doctors, but it all has to do with political will. The difference is, I think, is that we think that medicine is like a luxury almost. And if we treated medicine more like a necessity, we would be a healthier society.
Aspirations are to actually link up, get folks together, and maybe do something. I mean, even if it's like diabetic classes or something that just happens to kind of unite us and build something together that helps to bring a nice experience to the masses here and show that, you know, we're not just your typical doctors that comes and studies internationally and then comes back and works in underserved. I mean, that's cute, but at the end of the day, there has to be something bigger that's on a more consistent basis.
So I think the future that I'd like to see is a future where it is so natural and obvious that we need to think of our actions in relation to the impact that it's going to have on each other and to the rest of the world and the environment. I want to see a future where from birth, our education and our entire society is really geared towards enhancing our role to bring good into the world. And I think overall, after being here, I really want to see a future where these kinds of things that we're talking about here are as natural to connect to health as the individual work of the physicians that we expect to see now. This should be the role of absolutely everyone in the society. Our health has never and will never be just biological sciences. And I want to be able to talk about this freely when I go back home, just as I can talk about it freely while I'm in Cuba, and not have it be separated as if politics is on this side and life is on the other and health is somewhere else. It's always been related, and I want to see that reflected in the work that we all do in the future.
One more.